Hi, everyone. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And it's time for a tier list. I'm going to tier out what I feel are the best and worst core Death Grips projects, the West Coast experimental hip hop outfit. We've had a full decade of a fantastic catalog from them. Obviously, they've proven themselves to be one of the most groundbreaking music groups of all time, not just in the past 10 years. And I thought with them taking seemingly a bit of a hiatus right now, it seems like most of the members are focusing on other things and other projects. Maybe a while before we hear more Death Grips, or Death Grips maybe kind of, finished at this point. I guess we will see how all of this, pans out into the future, and I'll obviously have comments on new music when and if new music drops, but as it stands, we have a pretty robust catalog, a very strong 10-year run from Death Grips, where they came out with a lot of great boundary-pushing music. And I thought it would be interesting for a lot of people out there who are maybe not so initiated into the Death Grips catalog to go through some of these records and talk about some of what makes them a highlight for me, a low light, which ones have kind of stood out to me over the course of time, which ones I still kind of come back to. My opinions on a lot of these records have shifted slightly over the years. I'm not, saying I've done like a 180 on any of these LPs, but if you go into my YouTube catalog, you may see that I've, put one opinion out there, and I mostly stand by, a lot of the positive and negative notes that I've said in those reviews. Things have shifted maybe ever so slightly, and looking at the whole catalog together, it does sort of give me at least some perspective in terms of like which records I enjoy more than others, especially when I have to put them into, kind of a tier list context. So I think without any further ado, let's just get right into the Death Grips catalog and start ranking out these records. Let's begin with their groundbreaking debut mixtape, Ex-Military. This thing started as like a bomb going off at the start of the 2010s, and it is still like that. It's such a raw, compelling, exciting combination of hip hop and rock and noise. There are so many Death Grips classics to come off of this LP, so many chaotic and well-assembled instrumentals, as well as insane vocal performances from Ride throughout this project. I mean, it doesn't matter how old Death Grips gets. Songs like Tachyon are always, songs like Guillotine are always going to sort of define the band just because of how like raw and exciting and mind-blowing that production and those performances were. And I like how Death Grips, even though they kind of defined a certain level of extremity within hip-hop and within the underground for the past 10 years, those songs, still to this day, still sound explosive. They still sound extreme. They still sound monstrous. I think it says a lot about how grand and unique of a statement Death Grips made with this project for those songs to sound as hard as they do still to this day. I love pretty much every track on this thing. The record is just bops from front to back. I was super impressed with it the moment I reviewed it. I have acknowledged in the years since that it has grown on me massively since that initial review, as I have, familiarized myself more with like what Death Grips is, because I think you have to realize that like, even though I loved their stuff when I first reviewed it, there's still a lot about Death Grips you still don't understand with them being a relatively new group. With more time, with more context, and a larger catalog, I think it's only made Ex-Military sound and look more and more essential over the years. I have to put this in the S column, but bam, it's the S. It's the S. Ba-boo, yeah, it's in the S. Following this, we have the group's commercial debut record, The Money Store. Boo. Here we go, The Money Store. Again, Death Grips' commercial debut record, I believe for Epic Records before they got dropped from the label with that whole insane deal where they wanted to drop like 2 records in one and they leaked their next one, which we will talk about soon. But many of you may remember this LP as my first 10, and I still very much strongly stand by those feelings on this record. This is a landmark moment for hip hop, and while it did not invent industrial hip hop, it certainly put the genre on the map. So many Death Grips classics on here, from The Fever to Hustle Bones to I've Seen Footage. And I think on this LP, Death Grips is like really starting to build their narrative and define who they are as a trio through this experimental electronic synthesized production, the insane samples, the explosivity coming through in the beats and the performances as well. And a lot of the narrative building around dystopia and the digital world and the internet. Yes, I think this is still a massively creative record. Still love the hell out of this record. Still think this album is amazing and groundbreaking and everything you want in an album that, like, I gave it a 10 out of 10, everything I would want at least. You know, in some respects, maybe it doesn't sound as unique as it once did because Death Grips continued to come out with music that I feel like built on a lot of the ideas of this record. Even into the deep end of Death Grips' catalog, they were still playing with and building on and employing different versions of ideas and concepts that I feel like they forged on the Money Store, as are a lot of people out there who are making experimental, noisy, very abrasive music right now across the internet, be it Bandcamp, SoundCloud, or anywhere in between. I think it's a hell of a release. I'm still feeling like I can confidently throw this into the S section of this tier list. Ba-bam, here we go. First, two projects. Obviously, my love of Death Grips is coming through. I think you knew what you were going to get going into this one anyway. Boop, here we have No Love Deep Web, which is the record that pretty much got the band thrown off of their record label because they released it, leaked it onto the internet for free with a penis on the album cover, and it was a whole big dramatic to-do. This record, by comparison with Death Grips' two previous so far, it's a little more low-key. I know in the grander scheme of things, it's Death Grips and it still sounds insane. It's still in your face. It's still fiery and aggressive, but at least for me, this felt like a less exciting album at the time, and maybe that was because the production felt so stripped back and so skeletal. But honestly, and look, I did give this a positive review at the time. I did love this album at the time, but, you know, I didn't quite love it as much as the Money Store, and there were maybe some things that I enjoyed about the Money Store that I wasn't getting from this record. I have found myself over the years coming back to this album again and again and again and again, and oddly enough, that's because I find it to be so catchy. I find the hooks on this one to really pop. I think this record is like really about Ride. And what I really appreciate about this album most is like some of Ride's best and stickiest lyrics are on this project. Some of his most, I guess, dramatic and expressive vocal performances. And when I say expressive, I don't just mean like he's screaming. I feel like he's really the star of the show on this album, which again is maybe like a hard or a weird call to make, considering most things being so loud and so desperate to steal your attention in an aggressive way on every Death Grips album. But, you know, Ride really steals the show on this one. I feel like he does this thing so well and defines this record in a way that I don't think he could have if it was as noisy or if it was as all over the place as a Money Store or as an ex-military. I find it to be a really cohesive and well put together album too. Love it a little bit more than I did when I originally reviewed it, for sure, just like ex-military. All right, next we have the group's next studio LP. It is Government Plates. This, out of all of my Death Grips reviews, I think is my lowest Death Grips review, and that's mostly for reasons that I still feel to this day. It's one of their more scant LPs. It is one of their records that has songs on it that frankly I find kind of annoying or just lacking in progression to the point where I just feel like I'm listening to a motif or something that's not quite finished. Now, that being said, some of my favorite Death Grips songs land on this project, like Pillbox Hat, for example. Some of Ride's most insane performances, some of the group's most defining production turns up on this record. I do not encourage anyone to skip this album in any way. I feel like you also have to take into account that this wasn't simply just an album for Death Grips, but also like somewhat of a visual project for them as well. Even though I may not be crazy about it as an album, I feel like merely looking at it as if it's an album, an audio piece, and just an audio piece isn't fully doing it a service. Or, you know, if you're just kind of comparing it just based on the audio, it may be lacking in ways that are okay because the band wasn't trying for this to be like, a chorus verse chorus type project like everything they had put out so far, from front to back anyway. I'll put this in the C column. It's fine. It's decent. It's got great tracks on it. I implore that you listen to it. Has it grown on me a bit since like the 6 out of 10 that I think I originally gave it? Yes, but it's just still not my favorite. All right, next we have NOTM, or the first half of the Powers That Be, a record that many fans may remember was released, and it was said to be the first half of a double album, and it took forever for that second half, Jenny Death, to come out, because shortly after the release of this, Death Grips had a performative breakup of sorts. Look, the defining characteristic of this LP, which was pretty mind-blowing at the time, was that like from front to back, there is just nonstop Bjork vocal samples, which does make this a very creative and very unique record in the Death Grips discography, and one that at the time was kind of mind-blowing. And as a fan, it was really awesome to like see this kind of two-way love going between the band and such an incredible force within the world of art pop and experimental music. So anyway, look, there are a lot of tracks on this thing that I like quite a bit. I think it's a very creative record, and structurally, I think it's a pretty abstract album on the part of Death Grips too. But I do have to admit, this is an album that I am not as crazy about when I first heard it, and I do feel like the Bjork vocal samples are a little incessant. And while I do greatly appreciate their attempts at, applying those vocals as if they're just another instrument or just another piece of sound, maybe that's not being done to the degree that it could, or to the degree where I don't just feel like I'm listening to vocal samples over and over and over that kind of take me out of the vibe and out of the place of the album itself. It's still a record that I appreciate. It's still an album that I enjoyed quite a bit at the time, and still a standout, piece of work from Death Grips in terms of like, who the hell else is doing this shit? So from there, in the interim between this record and its second half, we of course had BAM! Fashion Week, which was an instrumental album from Death Grips before they really kind of came back with that second half of the Powers That Be, Jenny Death. And this one I think is, it's okay. It's all right. I appreciated it a lot when I first heard it. I was really excited to hear that, the band was back, still active. We're actually going to get that second record, but it's not a project that, even though the instrumentals on here are pretty cool, again, just instrumental, no ride to speak of. Even though those instrumentals are cool, it's just not one I find myself coming back to all that often, and I feel like the novelty of the production on this one has worn off a little bit as well. It may be one of their weakest projects, but honestly, I don't think it's really trying to be anything more than just like a reminder that we're still here. Anticipate Jenny Death. Here you go. Just be excited. It's kind of a creative way to tease their fans, and I don't read it as too much more than that. Boom, here we go. Jenny Death, The Powers That Be, complete. Where would I place this one? This record, by comparison with NOTM, is like completely different. I'm still bewildered to this day, like what exactly makes these a double album, because they just seem like they're coming from two totally different worlds, although there does seem to be a driving sonic element to this record as well, and that is the guitar, which prior on Death Grips releases didn't play too huge of a role, at least definitely not as huge of a role as it does here. There are massive, distorted, blaring riffs all over this thing. This is easily Death Grips', I think, their loudest record, and it's almost their loudest record, in my opinion, to a fault. The sound of this thing crushes me. It deafens me. It oppresses me. And, the performances are so insane and so aggressive that I feel like they're not even as tight or as well executed as they could be. Frankly, there are some parts of this album that, as I go back to it, drum parts and guitar parts that do come off a little off and a little sloppy. I'm still not really crazy about Centuries of Damn, which was sort of a low point for me in the track list. There are still a lot of songs on here that I enjoy the hell out of. Obviously, Breaking Mirrors, or I Break Mirrors with My Face in the United States, and Inanimate Sensation. There are a lot of great highlights. There are a lot of extreme instrumentals, incredible and whacked out performances from Ride, and catchy choruses too. Don't get me wrong, I think this is a very good LP, but there are some low points that over the years have felt even lower for me, which is why I would probably put this one in the B column. There you go. B, 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 B. Bottomless Pit. This one for me is a record that, frankly, I find myself coming back to a lot. In my review, I said that I feel like this album is a lot of the elements of the Money Store being built upon in a very clear way. And yeah, that's what I think this is. I think it's just like straight industrial hip hop as Death Grips defined it. No more, no less, but with just like one incredible slapper after another. Some of their best and catchiest beats of all time are on this record. I know over the years, like, this album hasn't like proven itself in the way that Ex-Military has, or the Money Store has in terms of single power, but like, goddamn, there are songs on this thing that to me are even catchier than songs off of that, like Bubbles Buried in This Jungle or Three Bedrooms in a Good Neighborhood. To me, those tracks are just as catchy and just as unique and just as like hard hitting as any classic Death Grips song. I feel like they just truly weren't fucking around on this album. This album is no muss. It's no fuss. It's just like, we've done this. We're going to kind of go back to our roots on this one. We're going to go back to, what kind of defined us as a group. We're not going to, do some like weird, fucked up, crazy concept or anything like that. We're going to get back to basics, and we're going to improve on those basics. Then that leaves us with their last core studio album that they have put out, 2018 record, Year of the Snitch. Now, this album as well, in contrast with Bottomless Pit, feels like Death Grips like tearing down everything that fans knew them for up until this point. I feel like this is Death Grips just like really fucking it up, breaking expectations, going weird, having absolutely no defining sound or idea or narrative to anything, even sometimes within single songs, which go left very often, have abstract song structures, or just take a while to like really settle down or just wrap your head around. It's a completely weird, fucked up LP, and I feel like a lot of this is Death Grips taking the piss, challenging their fans, self-commentating, especially with that last track, Disappointed. I feel like the band was almost putting out this record as a means of, again, just breaking expectations, and I think they're sounding really good doing it. Then I also want to give a quick shout out to the Steroids Gabber mix and EP. This was also released during a time when it seemed like, toward the end of Death Grips' decade in the 2010s, where they were just really experimenting, doing some weird shit, trying anything. And look, I think their approach to gabber and electronic music was really awesome in this mix. And while I think a mix is like a really fitting way to approach this sound and, deliver it to the fans, I would have loved to have heard an album of this shit, frankly. I think it's a really good record. Sure, there are some points where it hits a bit of a lull, and it's kind of difficult to wrestle with as an entire piece because it is like this one lengthy piece as opposed to being parsed out in single type tracks. But I still think it's really good, quite a highlight, has shown itself to be very strong and very bold in the Death Grips catalog. I would put it in the B column. And I think with that, that pretty much leaves us at the end of our tier list over here. Here is my Death Grips tier list. Here it is, bitches. Read it and weep. Those are my S tiers. Those are my A tiers, my Bs, my Cs, my D. Fashion Week, I guess, landing down toward the bottom down there. The Interview Project would probably land around there as well, as that one's not too enticing either. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that Death Grips catalog, y'all. Those are my thoughts on that Death Grips catalog. Love you very much. You're the best, best, best. Let me know what yours are, your picks and your tiers for the Death Grips catalog down in the comments below. And have a good day. Mwah. Forever.